Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I rise today to speak to Private Members Bill M213, the Drug Use and Prevention Education in Schools Act, and to explain why I cannot support moving this bill forward. Let me begin by affirming something I believe we all share in this chamber, a deep and unwavering commitment to the health, safety, and well-being of our students. We want our children to thrive. We want them to be informed, resilient, and supported. We want our schools to be places of learning, compassion, and inclusion. But this bill, as proposed, does not advance those goals. In fact, it risks undermining them. First, let's address the legislative framework. Under the current School Act, the Minister already has the authority to issue ministerial orders related to educational programs, graduation requirements, and health and social supports. The Minister can also require boards to prepare and submit reports. In other words, the objectives of this bill can already be achieved without introducing new legislation. Creating standalone legislation for something we already have the tools to address is not only unnecessary, it's inefficient. It diverts time, energy, and resources away from implementation into bureaucracy. Second, our government is committed to meaningful consultation when considering any legislative change. That means engaging with teachers, parents, trustees, First Nations, and independent school sector, each of whom bring unique perspectives and needs. There's no evidence that such consultation took place in the drafting of this bill. That absence is not just a procedural oversight, it's a fundamental flaw. We cannot legislate in isolation. We must legislate in partnership with the communities we serve. Third, and perhaps most critically, this bill promotes a stigmatizing approach to substance use education. Research is unequivocal. Stigma does harm. Stigma deters people from seeking help. It worsens health outcomes. It reinforces a negative social perceptions of people who use substances, and it limits the quality of care when accessing services. If students who are using substances or who have family members who do feel judged or shamed in their classrooms, they're less likely to reach out to trusted adults. That means fewer opportunities for intervention, fewer pathways to support, and more young people suffering in silence. Promoting stigma runs counter to everything we know about effective education and compassionate care. Now let's talk about cost. The approach outlined in this bill could cost $2 million for curriculum design and development and nearly $3 million annually for education sessions. That's a significant investment, especially when we already have a world-renowned curriculum. The BC curriculum is competency-based, co-constructed, and infused with First Nations people's principles of learning. It puts students and their well-being at the center. Other jurisdictions like the Yukon and Northwest Territories look to our curriculum as a model. Why would we spend millions to replace something that is already working? Let me be clear. We're not ignoring the issue of substance use. Far from it. We support 39 integrated child and youth teams across 20 school district communities, providing wraparound mental health and substance use care when and where it's needed. Through the Mental Health in Schools strategy, we've invested over $30 million in grants to all 60 school districts and the Federation of Independent Schools Association. We offer virtual training sessions for parents and guardians, reaching nearly 2,600 participants in the last 2 years. The ministry's Erase program provides information, resources, and supports related to substance use. The BC curriculum already includes education on the negative health consequences of drug use. Finally, I want to address the philosophical underpinning of this bill. Mandating that students learn to stigmatize drug use and people who use drugs undermines the very essence of education. Education is about teaching students how to think, not what to think. It's about fostering critical judgment, empathy, and understanding. This bill does the opposite. It prescribes shame, it promotes judgment, and it risks alienating students who may already be struggling. Let's not forget, in any given classroom, there may be students who have lost loved ones to overdose, students who are living with addiction in their families, students who are themselves navigating substance use. Asking teachers to stigmatize drug use puts them in an impossible position and puts vulnerable students at greater risk. Schools must be safe, caring, and inclusive communities. They must be places where every student feels welcome and supported. Let's continue to build on that foundation, not tear it down with legislation that does more harm than good. We care deeply about students, we care about their well-being, and we are already taking meaningful steps to address substance use in our schools. Honourable Speaker, for all these reasons, the legislative redundancy, the lack of consultation, the harm of stigma, the financial cost, and the misalignment with our educational values, I cannot support Bill M213. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
Recognizing the member from Richmond Centre.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I rise today in strong support of Bill M213, the Drug Use Prevention Education in Schools Act. While preparing this speech, I learned of another heartbreaking tragedy, a life lost to overdose in Richmond, just not far from my constituency office. It is a painful reminder that this crisis is here, in our neighborhoods, in our schools, and among our families. And every life lost is one too many. Earlier this year, a 12-year-old girl in Surrey died from drug overdose, one of the youngest victims in our province history. Her mother told me I was the first and only MLA who called to offer support. That conversation will stay with me forever. No parent should ever feel alone in grief, and no child should lose their life before it even begins. This is why this bill matters. M213 ensures drug use prevention education is consistent and mandatory across all BC schools. It gives young people the knowledge, the courage, and the tools to make the right choice before tragedy even strikes. Prevention must start early, in classroom, in communities, long before addiction takes hold. Honourable Speaker, this should never be a partisan issue. Education and prevention should unite us. Yet, it is deeply disappointing to hear that this NDP government is not willing to support drug use prevention education in schools. Their members said, quote, prioritize outcomes over optics, unquote. Yet 16,000 British Columbians have died under their watch. They said, quote, follow science, unquote. Yet more youth has died from overdose in this year than in 2024. They said, quote, choose education over ideology, unquote. Yet they intend to vote against drug education in schools. They said, quote, choose hopes over fear, unquote. But there's no hope. When the addiction crisis keeps getting worse, not better, under their watch. They said, quote, why spend millions when this even is already working, unquote. A 12-year-old girl just passed earlier this year due to toxic drug crisis. Honourable Speaker, I find it truly ironic, even oxymoronic, that the NDP government is willing to say smoking and vaping is bad, but not willing to say drugs are bad. M213 is not about politics, it's about people. It is about every parent who has lost a child, every student at risk, and every teacher who needs the tool to help. Honourable Speaker, let us stand together, support prevention through education, and save lives. Thank you very much.
Recognizing the leader of the third party.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, just say no. It's a strange coincidence that Ronald Reagan is having a revival in the tariff context. I remember Just Say No to Drugs from Ronald and Nancy Reagan in the 1980s. This images of an egg sizzling in a pan, this is your brain on drugs. Madam Speaker, it didn't work. Even DARE, the Drug Abuse Resistance Education, has since modernized its approach. I fully respect the member who has no doubt good intentions, and we all would like to see the end of drug use with our students. I do, however, disagree with the approach. The Third Party Caucus is committed to listening to experts and evidence. Those on the front lines of the toxic drug crisis are not asking for abstinence. In study after study after study, it's shown not to work. This private member's bill is so prescriptive. I can't help but feel that it's issues like this where we sit in this chamber and we can be out of touch with reality. We're constantly presented with problems and challenges. That's part of our work. Sometimes the solutions seem so simple. We could just wave our magic wand and ask everyone, especially our kids, to stop using drugs. But I worry that we only hear one side. We hear of schools teaching kids about safe supply and harm reduction, and that's alarming. But if a student is already using drugs, what's our obligation? I would suggest it's to help make sure they don't die, not to push an idealistic abstinence narrative. We in the third party often accused of being too idealistic, and I take that to heart. But in the case of some of these social issues, sometimes I wonder who is idealistic. The fact is, we live in a hard world, and trauma and personal challenges often lead to drug use. The fact is not that we aren't saying drugs are dangerous loudly enough, it's just that some students can't hear us. It's frustrating. We all want the same thing here. We want people to stop dying from a poisoned drug supply, and for everyone in this province, especially our youth, to live long and healthy lives. So it's not a question of differing values, it's a question of approach. I hear the term common sense in this chamber, and I worry sometimes that it's a knee-jerk response to anecdotes rather than evidence. Post-analysis showed that years after its inception, DARE, the Drug Abuse Resistance Education, its effectiveness was shown to be minimal. But the program remained popular among politicians and many members of the public because of a common intuition that the program ought to work. That's true, it ought to work. There's an idealism and common sense again. This bill is so prescriptive that it doesn't contemplate consultation with mental health and substance use experts, teachers, school boards, or First Nations. Frankly, they're the people who should be deciding what the messages are, where the posters go, and what individual students need to hear about drugs. I can't think of a more illustrative example of where we're running around trying to treat the symptoms instead of spending time and effort on the root causes. Yes, shame has a place in enforcing the social contract. Yes, compassion is not the only strategy here, although we do all need to remember that there, but for the grace of God, go we. Let's have a quick think about the root of the word stigma. It describes the wounds from crucifixion. As a society and as members of this House, haven't we progressed? Haven't we evolved our healthcare, our regulation, and our justice system beyond pure stigma? We need to talk more about the root causes of drug use, addiction, and overdose deaths. Childhood trauma, isolation, misinformation, unregulated and poisoned supply, and inadequate healthcare. The opposition seems to think it's the government sending the message that drugs are normal. Well, I have bad and sad news. Drugs are normal. They're everywhere. Not just legal drugs like Tylenol, Prozac, Viagra, hormone replacement therapy, or alcohol. Also, as we know, much more harmful drugs. This is the reality of the province that we live in. The question then is how we respond to this reality. In this caucus, we believe we respond by talking to experts and educators, people who have used drugs, people in treatment, people who work in healthcare, first responders, social workers, and the teachers who bring their school classes into this gallery every day. Instead of trying to convince kids to do what we say, we should educate them about how to understand drugs and drug abuse. The psychological, biochemical, and emotional background behind drug use needs to be taught in our education system. Doubling down on shame, stigma, and fear is the wrong message and the wrong approach for our education system. Our children deserve excellent, evidence-based education to help them navigate this challenging world, and we owe them nothing less. This caucus will be voting against second reading of this bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Recognizing the member from Esquimalt-Colwood.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're gathered here today on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin-speaking people, today known as Songhees and Coast and First Nations. I'm going to add a little different perspective to this bill. I do rise today to express my deep concerns about Bill 213 and to share why I cannot support it. My position comes not only from my professional working background in mental health and addiction for 18 years, under 4 premiers, but also as lived experience. As someone who has seen the impacts of issues up close, as you've heard me say in this chamber, I have a father with 35 years of sobriety, and I'm very proud of him for that. And fun fact, he disagrees with this bill. As a mother who wants to see also a better future for her children. Before entering public life, I spent 18 years working in this field. Over those years, I worked in a detox program, a stabilization unit, recovery houses, and outpatient services. I also spent some time working specifically with youth, including at our youth detox. Through that work, I have countless conversations with young people who began their struggles with substance use at an early age and their families. When I started my career, we treated mental health and substance use as entirely separate issues. But that approach failed. We learned through hard experience that these challenges are often deeply connected, and that only by treating them together as concurrent disorders can we actually truly help people in recovery. Many of those people I work with have gone through programs like DARE or Just Say No. They were created with the best of intentions, but they didn't stop youth from using substances. In fact, for many, it created quite a bit of shame. For those youth began to struggle, they were afraid to seek help. They felt like they've already failed. That experience taught me something that research has since confirmed. Education about substance use must be non-stigmatizing, supportive, and evidence-based. Fear and shame are not preventive strategies, and in fact, they are actually a barrier to care. Our government has made clear that we care deeply about the health and well-being of students and their families. We also know that education is one of the most powerful tools we can to reduce harm and prevent substance use before it starts. British Columbia already has a world-renowned curriculum that includes age-appropriate learning about substance use, designed by experts, informed by evidence. Other provinces across Canada look to our model when shaping their program. In the Greater Victoria region, we actually have a program called the Umbrella Society, which is partially funded by this government, who actually goes into schools and people tell their stories. And then not only do they tell their stories about where life has taken them within their addiction, they leave room for anonymous questions. Investing in programs like that give youth the space they need to learn about the road it may take them down, but if they're already there, where to go for help. In addition, the Ministry of Education offers free vital training sessions for parents and guardians to help them talk to their children about substance use in an open, supportive, and informed way. And across 20 school districts, communities, 30 integrated children, youth teams provide wraparound mental health substance use, bringing care to young people when and where they need it most. The best conversations I ever had with my dad during his recovery journey were at our kitchen table, talking about if I needed help, if something happened, where it would be. When I was in my school system, didn't go to school, for fun fact, in British Columbia on the record, I went to school in Eastern Canada. But we still had similar programs back then, for if something had happened, I knew where to go. Bill 213, however, moves us in the wrong direction. The level of prescription on the bill and its focus on shame-based education does not align with our provincial evidence-based, compassionate approach. A stigmatizing curriculum is not supported by research and has the potential to do real harm. Schools should be a place of belonging and safety, not places that promote judgment and fear. The bill would also place teachers in a different position. Imagine being asked to deliver lessons that stigmatize substance use in a classroom where students may have lost a parent, a sibling, or a friend to an overdose, or some students are living with addiction within their own families. This is not compassion. This is not learning. Mandating stigma undermines the very purpose of education. Our classroom should help students think critically, develop empathy, and understand complex social issues, not teach them to make moral judgments about those who are struggling. Throughout my career, I have held the hands of people at their very lowest point. People who came through detox again and again, trying to rebuild their lives. No amount of fear-based education would stop them from using. In fact, they would say things to me like, "I'm sorry, I'm back here," which is quite shameful, because we need to ensure that when everyone's at their lowest point, that they can access wraparound care without guilt. What did make a difference, again, was understanding, supporting, and care and treatment they deserved with dignity. As a mother, as someone who comes from a family touched by both mental health and addiction, I can say with certainty that this bill would not make it easier for me to talk to my children about substance use. It would actually, in fact, make it harder, because fear is not education. Stigma, quite frankly, is not prevention. When the time comes for me or for any parent to support a child who may be struggling, we need tools that help them understand the why behind substance use. We need a system that is compassionate and evidence-based. No young person has ever started using opiates, crack, pot, benzos, or alcohol thinking they would become addicted. Addiction doesn't begin with intent. It begins with pain, with circumstance, with vulnerability. And the lasting thing someone needs is pain and more shame. What they need is support. What they need is understanding. And what they deserve is an education system that reflects the best of what we know. The people heal when they are seen, supported, and valued. For all these reasons, Madam Speaker, I cannot good conscience support Bill 213. It does not reflect evidence, it does not reflect compassion, it does not reflect the values of our province, and it doesn't only personally reflect my values and the things I agree to in my prior life working in mental health and addiction. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Recognizing the member from Richmond Bridgeport, you've got about nine minutes.
I rise today in strong support of Bill M213, the Drug Use Prevention Education in Schools Act. This is a bill that I believe is not only important, but absolutely necessary for the protection of our children and the health of our community. It represents a commitment to prevention, to education, and to the principle that we must equip the next generation with the tools to make safe and informed choices. When we talk about the drug crisis in BC, we often talk about the numbers, about the heartbreaking overdose statistics, about the billions of dollars in health spending, about the growing weight on families and community. But behind those numbers are children, young people growing up in an environment where drugs are increasingly visible, increasingly accessible, and increasingly normalized. I speak today not just as the MLA for Richmond Bridgeport, but as a representative of families in my riding who are worried about the safety of their children. I also speak as a mother and grandmother of 3 lovely grandchildren, aging from 3 to 8. Together with the parents and grandparents of Richmond, we are so worried about the safety of our children. In my community, we have seen the very real consequence of this government's approach to drug policy. Time and again, the NDP has attempted to push drug consumption sites and low-barrier supportive housing into neighborhoods without proper public consultation, without sufficient safeguards, and without preparing the community, especially our children, for the risks and challenges that come with them. A clear example is the Elderbridge Modular Housing Project. When it was first introduced, we were told that it would provide stability, safety, and support. Instead, what we have seen is mismanagement. Residents in the area have witnessed a spike in crime, more visible drug use, and even open drug dealing on the streets. Parents and Strata Council President Clifton Zhang have written to me to say that their children and residents feel unsafe walking to school and work, that they see people using drugs in public places, and that the sense of security they once had in their community has eroded. This is not what responsible governance looks like. A government that truly cares about public safety, about the well-being of children, would not impose a project without listening to local voices. It would not ignore the concern of parents. It would not create situations where kids are forced to walk past people openly using or dealing drugs on their way to school. In Richmond, Bridgeport, what we have seen is not compassion. This is chaos. This is an approach that prioritizes ideology over safety and announcements over results. Prevention starts with education, with community standard, and yes, with a healthy degree of social disapproval for behaviors that destroy lives. Let us be clear. All we want is to help people who struggle with addiction, but help must come with responsibility. Supportive housing must be truly supportive, not a warehouse that concentrates problems and leaves surrounding community to deal with the fallout. Drug consumption side must be considered carefully with real consultation, real safeguards, and real respect for the people who live nearby. And all of this initiative must be paired with education and prevention. We cannot continue down a path where the government creates problems, then it solves, where communities are left to fend for themselves, and where children are treated as afterthoughts. The people of Richmond, Bridgeport, and indeed all British Columbians deserve a government that will put safety and prevention first. And Bill M213 gives us a chance to take a step in the right direction. It signals that we are serious about prevention. It says to parents, we hear you. We will give your children the knowledge they need, and we will not leave them unprotected in the face of this crisis. It says to communities, we will not normalize drug use in front of your kids. We will not stay silent, and we will not hide from the reality that children need guidance and protection. Madam Speaker, I urge every member of this House to support Bill M213. This is not, again I repeat, not a partisan issue. This is about the well-being of our children and the strength of our communities. The drug crisis does not stop at party lines. It touches every corner of this province. But if we are serious about addressing it, we must start with prevention. We must start with education. Let us pass this bill. Let us protect our children. Let us show British Columbians that the legislature here understands the urgency of this crisis and is willing to act with compassion and responsibility. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Recognizing the opposition House Leader.
Thank you very much. I rise today in full support of Bill M213.
Remember, just to let you know, we've got about 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. When I hear the debate around this, again, we talk about definitions of words like stigma or shame or fear. And I'd like to remind everybody in this House that those are actually emotions that the family members feel and have to live with, and that are permanent for them when they lose their child to an overdose. And when we talk about defining a word like stigma and what it may or what it may not mean, and we're looking to something like the dictionary to tell us, again, I go back to these are feelings that we have, and these are words, and what we need to do is wrap around our children and our youth and actually give them the information that they get to decide. Tell them the truth, and then they get to decide how they feel about that information. Hearing some of the debate around this again and talking about evidence, I think the evidence is clear. As we see more and more young people thrust into a life of addiction, and yes, it absolutely is unintended consequences. But we know because of the types of drugs that are out there that are circulating, that sometimes they don't even know that they're taking Things can happen, and they can happen in an instant. Some of the literature that I get is terrifying to me because some of these drugs are packaged to look like candy, are packaged to look like the regular vapes that we all know. Yes, absolutely. The leader of the Green Party is talking about, the fact that these things are illegal for young people, but look, they are doing them. We are seeing them. But how did we get here? Why is it normal? We should be asking ourselves those questions as well. And it's terrifying for me as a mother that my kids aren't being shown the truth about exactly what they could be taking. And we know in so many overdose instances, young people have taken something that they don't know what it is, and that is the fatal end to their life. And I believe education, telling them the truth and letting them decide how they feel about it, is going to be the change that we need. You have to tell young people the truth. And you don't get to wrap it in a bunch of niceties and tell them to drink water and do these things that's going to help them adjust to these drugs. That is not the approach we need to take. We need to do something that's drastic, and I believe this bill does that.
I call the member for Richmond-Queensborough to close debate.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to close the debate on Bill 213 by returning to the simple, urgent truth that brought this bill forward. Our children are at risk. Our schools must do everything in their power to protect them. Now, we have heard a lot from the NDP MLAs talk about one word that shows up once in this bill, stigma. Now, if the NDP MLAs really care about drug use prevention education in schools, what they can do today is pass this bill at second reading and send it to committee and make amendment. If that is not done, the public will see where the NDP MLAs stand. If they stand for drug use prevention education in this province or they don't. That will be a clear message today. Also, this bill comes 2 weeks after the Premier made a statement out in public saying that the drugs decriminalization policy is a wrong policy, and he was wrong in that aspect. So why not pass this bill, Drug Use Prevention Education in Schools Act, today? Madam Speaker, we are living through a drug crisis unlike anything British Columbia has seen ever before. More than 2,500 lives lost last year alone. 7 deaths a day, average. Families torn apart in every region of this province. Children increasingly exposed to drug culture and mixed messages in the very schools that should keep them safe. For too long, the response from this government has been to normalize drug use. Harm reduction is emphasized, while prevention and abstinence are sidelined. Flashcards, classroom materials, and so-called safe supply messages soften the reality of drugs instead of confronting it. The line between compassion and permissiveness has been blurred, and our youth are paying the price. Madam Speaker, one of the central principles of this bill is the need to tell kids, educate kids of the negative consequences of trying drugs. What are the social consequences? What are the health consequences? What are the consequences in terms of their relations with their families? And what are the legal consequences? Kids need to understand this stuff. We must once again send a clear social and cultural signal that drug use is harmful, dangerous, and unacceptable. So the schools also have a duty. Schools have an ethical duty. Schools are more than just places of academic instruction. They are institutions of character, health, and responsibility. They have a public health duty and a moral duty to protect the children in the care and promote good public health. That duty requires schools to send one consistent, unambiguous message. Drugs are dangerous. Abstinence is the safest and responsible choice. Parents expect it. Teachers deserve the clarity to deliver it. And children's lives depend on it. Prevention is not just one option amongst many. It is the only safe choice. It is both an effective strategy because it prevents harm before it happens, and an ethical one because it is the only position that does not expose children to avoidable risk. By teaching drug prevention clearly, directly, and consistently, we give young children the knowledge and confidence to say no. We also give parents reassurance that schools are supporting, not undermining, the values taught at home. Madam Speaker, in conclusion, Bill M213 is not complicated. It is rooted in common sense. It is about protecting children, restoring moral clarity, and reinforcing the duty of schools to safeguard our youth. It is about telling the truth in plain language. Drugs kill, drugs devastate, and the abstinence is the only safe choice. Madam Speaker, prevention saves lives. This House has a duty to stand on the side of prevention, on the side of abstinence, on the side of families who are demanding action. I urge all members across party lines to support this bill. Thank you.
Members, the question is second reading of Bill number M213, entitled Drug Use Prevention Education in Schools Act. Those in favour indicate aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Nay. Division is being called. Pursuant to Standing Order 25, the division is deferred until 6 p.m. today. Honourable members, according to the order paper, we will look to the member for Nanaimo-Lantzville to move second reading of Bill number M216, Professional Reliance Act.